Can you imagine waking up one morning, your entire future laid out before you, only to find it completely erased? Not by a stranger, but by the very people who were supposed to be your safe harbor, who then looked you in the eye and told you that you just didn't matter enough to fight for. That moment, that's a wound I carried for 8 long years. And it started with a wire transfer confirmation that landed in my banking app at 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was 22, standing in the house I grew up in, humming with quiet excitement. I'd just been accepted into this incredible research fellowship, the kind of dream you whisper to yourself at 2 a.m., terrified of jinxing it by saying it too loud. It was a funded track toward a doctorate, a lab, a future built out of the one thing I was truly good at, asking small, careful questions until the world finally gave up an answer. I'd planned to share my amazing news at dinner, even rehearsed it in the shower like some kind of idiot, trying to sound excited but not boastful. But that morning, my mom was off, quieter than usual, drying the same clean plate over and over, carefully avoiding my gaze. I just figured she was tired. She worked long shifts, always came home worn thin. I'd learned to read the weather of our house by the slump of her shoulders, so I didn't push. I just poured my coffee, checked my phone, and then I saw it. The transfer. $95,000. My grandmother's college fund, the one that had followed my name for 18 years, was now completely gone. And in its place, my brother's name. Just like that. Moved clean, like a piece of furniture to another room. My parents had done it, quietly, and my brother had let them. I remember the sunlight hitting the kitchen counter, the exact dusty grain of it. I remember thinking, very calmly, this has to be a mistake. Because families don't do that. Not families like the one I thought I had. I set my cup down. I needed answers. Before I confronted anyone, though, I called the bank. I'm the kind of person who double-checks before she panics, you know? I needed facts, a name, a number. The woman on the line was patient, bless her. She confirmed it all. The account was a college savings plan, and the beneficiary had been changed. I asked how that was even possible without my signature. Gently, she explained, beneficiaries don't sign anything. The account owners control it. My parents, who'd opened it when I was 4, were the owners. I was just the name it pointed at. And a name, she said, can simply be pointed somewhere else. I stood there in the hallway, the phone pressed to my ear, and in that single, cold sentence, I understood. The safety I'd always taken for granted had never truly been mine. It had always been alone, and someone had just called it in. I thanked her, because I'm that person. I thank people even when my entire world is crumbling. Then I hung up. I did the quick, brutal math. A part-time job, $600 in my checking account. A fellowship that covered tuition. Sure, but not rent. Not food. Not the 4 years of scraping by that stood between me and the life I desperately wanted. That fund, it was the floor under all of it. And someone had just yanked the floor out. I didn't cry in that hallway. Not a single tear. I just went looking for a reason. Because I still, foolishly, believed there would be one that made sense. I found my brother, Dylan, first. He was 19 then, 3 years younger than me, sitting on the back steps, glued to his phone. The moment he saw my face, he flinched, then looked away. He had the decency, at least, to look ashamed. And here's the thing about Dylan that no one ever believes. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't a schemer. He was just a kid who took whatever was handed to him and never once questioned what it cost someone else. Because no one had ever taught him to ask. I just said his name. He flinched again. I asked him, very quietly, if he knew about the money. He mumbled that Dad told him it made more sense this way. More sense. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was edged with ice. What made more sense? He couldn't tell me, because he genuinely didn't know. He knew there was some business idea, a franchise thing, with a man Dad trusted from church. And my fund was apparently going to help it get started. He just said yes, he explained, the way you say yes to a second helping of dessert without thinking about it. He finally looked up at me, and I saw it in his eyes. He truly, completely, did not understand what he'd been given, or what had been violently ripped away to give it to him. He even asked if I was okay. That, honestly, almost broke me more than the transfer itself. It was such a small, hollow gesture of concern. I just told him, I don't know yet. Then I walked away. Dylan wasn't the one who'd made this choice. He was just the empty vessel they decided to fill. I found my father in the kitchen, coffee in hand. He stood exactly the way he always did when he'd already made up his mind, just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up and agree with him. I didn't shout. I've never been a shouter. I just asked him, plainly, why my college fund was now in Dylan's name. He took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee before he answered. That pause, it spoke volumes. It told me exactly how insignificant this entire situation was to him. He finally said Dylan needed a real start. That a son who carries the family name into the world, is an investment. He then looked at me, his own daughter, and added, without a flicker of emotion, that a daughter marries and becomes another family story. He said it like he was reading a weather report, completely certain, utterly unbothered. I just stared at him. I asked him if he understood that he had just stolen my entire future. My father, with a sigh that bordered on patience, set his cup down. And then he uttered the sentence that would etch itself into my soul, the one I would carry with me through every single day for the next 8 years. Blood comes first. Stop making this about you. You didn't matter enough to fight for. The worst part, he didn't say it in anger. Not a trace. He said it the way you state a fact about the tides. Something undeniable, utterly natural. I just stood there, and something inside my chest went quiet. Very quiet, very clear. Like a lake freezing over, perfectly still just before the deep cold sets in. I didn't answer him. I didn't look away. I just looked at the man who had raised me and understood, in that crystal-clear moment, that he genuinely believed I was a cost, and my brother was an asset, and no argument I could ever make would move a belief that deeply ingrained. My mother was at the sink, her back to us, scrubbing dishes that were already spotless. She'd been there the whole time, and when my father uttered those words, she didn't turn around. That's the part one couldn't forgive for so long. Not the money. The money was my father's crime, loud and clear and undeniably his. But my mother's silence, that was quieter, and it went so much deeper. Because silence is a choice you can make without ever having to look at the person you're choosing against. I waited. I gave her every single agonizing second in that kitchen to become the woman I still desperately hoped she was. She just kept scrubbing. The water ran. The house hummed with its familiar, tired sounds. And I stood in the middle of the only home I'd ever known, feeling it instantly transform into a place I was merely visiting. I said her name once. Mom. Her shoulders tightened, the way they did when a shift had run too long. Still, she didn't turn. It clicked then. She had known. Before I did. She had been drying that plate 3 times this morning because she was already grieving something. And it wasn't the money. It was me. She had already let me go in her own quiet way, long before I ever saw that wire transfer. I stopped waiting. I walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs. And behind me, the water just kept running. Like nothing in that house had changed. Because for them, nothing had. That night, I sat on the edge of my childhood bed. I didn't cry, and I need to be brutally honest with you about why. It wasn't some heroic display of strength. It was pure, cold arithmetic. Crying, I realized, is what you do when you still believe someone is coming to comfort you. And I had just learned, with gut-wrenching clarity, that no one was. So instead, I pulled out a notebook. I made a list, just like I do before every experiment. It's how I keep my hands from shaking. On one side, I wrote down everything I had lost, $95,000, a safety net, and a family, though I couldn't bring myself to write that last word yet. Typing it, seeing it, would make it too real. On the other side, I wrote what I still had, a mind that worked, a fellowship offer that covered tuition, an idea, a stubborn, quiet idea I'd been carrying around for 2 years, a research direction nobody at my old school had time for, a thin, almost invisible thread towards something that didn't even exist yet. It wasn't much of a column, let me tell you, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, it was something no one could point somewhere else. I sat with that sparse list until the house went completely dark, and somewhere past midnight, I finally understood. The question was no longer if they would fight for me. They had already answered that. The real question was, would I fight for myself? I tried once more. I need you to know that. I tried, because later, when the story of me got twisted around that family, I didn't want it to be said that I never gave them a chance. The next morning, I took the fellowship letter, the real one, with the official seal and my name spelled correctly, and brought it downstairs. I laid it on the kitchen table in front of my father. Foolishly, I thought maybe the problem was that he simply couldn't see me. That if he held the physical proof, the acceptance, the future somebody official had believed in, he might just reconsider what he thought I was worth. He glanced at it. He didn't even pick it up. He just said we'd talk about it when I'd calmed down. Which, you know, is exactly what people say when they've decided your feelings are an inconvenience that will just pass. My mother never came out of the bedroom. Dylan was already gone, off with that man from church, off to his real start. I stood there, clutching a letter that screamed, "Someone in the world thinks I'm worth investing in a kitchen where the two people who made me had decided I was absolutely not. The distance between those two facts, that became the entire shape of my life for the next 8 years. I picked the letter back up, folded it along its old crease, and understood the only person at that table who was going to fight for Paula Rowan was Paula Rowan. The next morning I left, and I did it the way I do everything, quietly and completely. I packed one bag. I've never owned much, which, as it turned out, was a mercy. My clothes, my notebook, the fellowship letter, a small, faded photograph of my grandmother, who had started that fund in the first place and would have been utterly ashamed of what her son did with it. Then I sat on my bed and, one by one, I blocked their numbers. My father, my mother, Dylan. I didn't send a speech. I didn't slam a door. A speech is a thing you give when you still want to be talked out of it. And I didn't want to be talked out of it. I wanted out. And here's the part I've never told anyone until now. When I pressed that last button, when the last number went silent, I wasn't angry. I was clear. Because in that moment, I finally believed my father. He had said I didn't matter enough to fight for. And standing at the threshold of the only home I'd ever known, one bag in my hand, I understood he was right about the fact, but so wrong about everything underneath it. To them, I wasn't worth fighting for. That was true. But what was also true, and what would take me 8 hard years to truly learn, was that this said everything about them, and absolutely nothing about me. I walked out the front door. I didn't look back. The old life ended on that step, and I couldn't have returned to it, even if I'd wanted to, because the girl who lived there was already gone. I took a bus out of town that afternoon, everything I owned stashed in the rack above my head. There's a particular kind of freedom in traveling light, and it's not the freedom greeting cards promise. It's the raw, stripped-down freedom of having nothing left to lose because someone already took it all. I watched the town I grew up in slide past the window, the church my father trusted more than his own daughter, the diner where my mother used to take me for pie when I was small, when she was still someone I recognized. And I felt the strangest thing. Not grief. Not yet. Relief. The deep, heavy relief of a person who has been holding her breath for years without even knowing it, finally allowed to exhale. The bag above my head was light because I wasn't carrying anyone anymore. No one's approval to manage. No one's silence to interpret. No one's coffee cup pausing at their lips while they decided what I was worth. I had a fellowship, a notebook, and an idea nobody wanted. And I was riding toward a city where not one soul knew my name or my father's opinion of it. I remember thinking, with the first dry flicker of the humor that would keep me alive for the next 8 years, that it's remarkable how much lighter your luggage gets when you stop packing other people's expectations. The bus pulled onto the highway. The town let go of me. I didn't wave. The city I chose was one of those places built entirely on top of research, all gleaming glass buildings and quiet money, where the coffee shops are full of people arguing about proteins, and the rent is a crime. I chose it on purpose. If I was going to build a life out of the one thing I was good at, I wanted to be where that thing lived. I found a room in a shared apartment with 3 strangers and a radiator that knocked all night. I took the fellowship, which covered my tuition and precisely nothing else. To cover that nothing else, I got a job in a lab washing glassware and running errands. The lowest rung. The invisible work. I didn't mind being invisible. Invisible is safe. Invisible is where you get to watch and learn without anyone deciding what you're worth. I watched. I worked until my hands cracked in the winter. And at night I read everything I could about that thin idea in my notebook, that research direction nobody at my old school had time for. until I understood it better than the people who had dismissed it. I was tired all the time, and I was broke in a way that has a specific taste, metallic, like counting change for the bus. But every night, when I closed that notebook, the idea in it was a little more alive than it had been that morning. And it was mine. That was enough to get me up the next day. What I didn't understand yet, what would nearly cost me everything, was that I was already making the same mistake my father had made, just in a different shape. I thought I had to do all of it alone. The lab work was mindless, which was a gift because it left my mind free to circle the idea. I worked the late shift when the building was empty, and in the dead hours between tasks, I would sit at an empty bench with my notebook and chase that thread. The idea was small and stubborn, a question about how a certain class of molecules behaved when you starve them of something they had always been given. And the more I pulled at it, the more it refused to let go of me. I started coming in early to use equipment no one was watching. I taught myself instruments I wasn't supposed to touch. Carefully, at night, cleaning up after myself so no one would know. I filled the notebook, then a second one. The idea stopped being a hobby and became the thing I woke up thinking about, the thing that made the metallic, broke feeling bearable. Because a person can survive almost anything if she has one thing that is entirely hers. I was building something in the dark, and no one knew. And that suited me exactly. But an idea, I would learn, is not a company. An idea is a seed. And a seed alone in the dark does not grow. It needs light. It cannot make itself. And it needs hands that are not your own. And I was a woman who had just learned, the hardest way there is, that other people's hands cannot be trusted. That belief kept me safe. It also nearly buried the seed with me. I met Nadia Okapour at 2 a.m. Both of us stealing time on the same mass spectrometer neither of us was authorized to use. She was an engineer, sharp as a blade. And she had been pushed out of a program in much the same way I had been pushed out of a family, by people who decided she didn't count and never had the courage to say it to her face. We circled each other for weeks like two suspicious cats. Territorial, each convinced the other was competition for the one machine and the few free hours. She caught me making an error in a setup and corrected it without being asked. And I hated her a little for being right. Then one night, I caught her staring at my notebook, left open on the bench. Instead of the smug look I expected, she had the look of a person seeing a door she hadn't known was there. She asked me one question about the idea. It was the right question. It was the question I had been circling for a month and couldn't quite name. And she named it in one clean sentence, the way you name a thing you've been dreaming about. I should have felt relief. What I felt instead was fear. Cold and immediate. Because the last time I let someone that close to something I loved, they moved it out of my name while I slept. I closed the notebook. I told her I was working alone. She shrugged and went back to her machine. I didn't know yet that I had just met the person who would save the thing I was about to nearly destroy by myself. I had a decision to make, and I made it the way I made everything then, out of the wound instead of out of a clear plan. The natural path for a woman with my fellowship and my early results was to go back into academia, to attach myself to a senior scientist, get my doctorate under someone's wing, and my funding through someone's grant, my future filtered through someone's approval. Everyone told me that was the sensible road, and every cell in me refused it, because I had already lived one version of that story. I knew exactly what it felt like to build your safety on top of someone else's decision, to be the beneficiary, never the owner, to wake up one morning and find yourself moved to a different room. I would not do it again. I would not depend on a single soul who could point my future somewhere else. So I chose the harder road, the one almost no one takes, the one where you go straight for the grants yourself, small government awards and foundation money, the funding that doesn't require you to belong to anyone. It meant no wing to shelter under, no senior name to open doors, just me, my results, and a stack of applications that would be judged on the work alone. I told myself it was strategy. It was strategy, but underneath the strategy was the wound, whispering the same thing it always whispered, that the only person I could truly trust was myself. And I mistook that whisper for wisdom for a very long time. My first grant application was rejected, and it was rejected badly. Not close, not encouraging. A form letter with a paragraph of reasons, each one a small, precise knife. I sat in my knocking radiator room and read it 4 times. And the old voice rose up, right on schedule. My father's voice, telling me I didn't matter enough, that I had reached above my station, and the world had confirmed what he already knew. For one full night, I let that voice win. And then, because I am who I am, I did the only thing that has ever actually helped me, which is to treat my own failure like an experiment. I stopped feeling and started reading. I went through every reason in that letter, not as an insult, but as data, and I saw that half of them were wrong. The reviewer had completely misunderstood the science, but half of them were right, and the right half showed me exactly where my idea was still a seed and not yet a plant. The proposal was brilliant and unbuildable. I had the vision and none of the engineering. I could see the molecule I wanted to make. I had no idea how to actually make it at scale, and no amount of staying up alone was going to teach me because it wasn't knowledge I was missing. It was a whole other mind. I sat there at 4 a.m. with the rejection in my hand and understood and refused to accept the thing that would take me another year to finally do. I needed Nadia, and needing anyone still felt like standing at the edge of that kitchen, waiting for someone who was never going to turn around. Nadia found me before I found the courage to find her. She came to my bench one night with a page of her own. Sketches. An engineering approach to exactly the problem the reviewer had flagged, the problem I couldn't solve alone. She had been thinking about my idea for weeks, unable to let it go, the way I had been unable to let it go. And she laid the page down next to my notebook and said, "We should build it together." It was the most frightening sentence anyone had said to me since blood comes first. I looked at that page and it was good. It was better than good. It was the missing half of my own mind, rendered in someone else's handwriting. And every part of me that wanted to say yes was drowned out by the part of me that remembered a transfer confirmation with the wrong name on it. To say yes to Nadia was to give someone else a hold on the one thing that was entirely mine. To make her an owner and not just a beneficiary. To risk waking up one morning, move to a different room. I told her I needed to think. She said, "Fine, but not for long. Ideas like this don't wait, and neither will I." Then she left me alone with the 2 pages, side by side, hers and mine, fitting together like they'd been torn from the same sheet. And I sat there, terrified of the only thing that could actually save me, another person. We submitted the second application together, and it nearly ended us before it began. Working with Nadia was like working with a mirror that talked back, and every strength she had landed exactly on a wound I had. She wanted shared data, open notebooks, everything on the table between us, because that was how she had learned to build things that lasted. And everything in me wanted to keep a copy no one else could see, a hidden version, an escape hatch, because that was how I had learned to survive. We fought about it in the language of professionals, which is to say, we fought about file permissions and authorship and who held the master copy. And underneath every argument about data was the real argument that I did not know how to let anyone all the way in. One night it boiled over. She accused me of treating her like a threat instead of a partner. And I heard my father in my own mouth when I answered, cold and certain and cruel, drawing lines about what was mine. She went quiet. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said she had left one place that treated her like she didn't count, and she was tired of paying for what they did. It landed like a slap because it was true, and because she had figured out, from nothing but the shape of my defenses, exactly what had been done to me. I didn't apologize that night, but I didn't delete the shared folder either. And for me, then, that was as close to trust as I could get. The second application didn't get rejected, but it didn't get funded either. It went into review limbo, that terrible silence where your whole future sits on some committee's table and you have no power over any of it. Waiting is the thing I am worst at, because waiting is being a beneficiary again, a name on someone else's decision. And in that waiting, the old voice came back, louder than ever. Every time Nadia and I started to trust each other, every time I felt the thing between us becoming real, my father's sentence would surface like a stone in dark water. You didn't matter enough to fight for. It had become the ruler I measured everything with, the floor under every fear. If my own parents could decide I was a cost, then anyone could. Then Nadia could. Then the whole world was just a series of people waiting to move me to a different room. I didn't say the sentence out loud. I never have until now. But it ran under everything I did like a current, pulling me back toward the solitude I mistook for safety. And the cruel joke was that the very thing my father did to prove I didn't matter had become the reason I couldn't let myself matter to anyone. I was still living in that kitchen. I had just moved the kitchen inside my own chest. Money came before the grant did, in the small, unglamorous way that real money usually arrives. A tiny research contract from a company that needed a specific problem solved and had heard, through the underground telegraph of late-night lab people, that 2 women were doing interesting work no one was paying attention to. It wasn't much, but it was enough to quit washing glassware. It was enough to rent a corner of a shared lab space, a real bench, ours, with our names on the sign-out sheet. I remember standing in that rented corner the first morning, breathing in the smell of it, solvent and dust and possibility, and feeling a hope so sharp it frightened me. Because hope is just another thing that can be taken. Nadia hung a whiteboard. I set up the notebook. Both of us, at last, on a shelf where either of us could reach it. It was the first thing I had ever owned jointly with another human being on purpose. And it terrified me. And it was the beginning of everything. That night we didn't celebrate. We worked. 2 women in a rented corner, chasing a molecule that didn't exist yet on money we could count in a single sitting. And I would not have traded that corner for my father's whole house. But hope, I was about to learn, is not the same as safety. And I was about to make the exact mistake that safety hunger sets you up for. The contract had a deadline, and deadlines are where my wound does its worst work. As the pressure rose, I did what I always did. I took it all onto myself. I stopped bringing Nadia into the big decisions, telling myself I was protecting her, sparing her the weight. When the truth was, I didn't trust anyone else to carry the thing I loved. I worked nights she didn't know about. I made a call to the contracting company alone about a change in scope, and I didn't tell her until it was done. It was the kind of thing partners are supposed to decide together, and I decided it by myself, because deep down I still believed that the moment I truly needed someone, they would turn their back and keep washing the dishes. Nadia found out. Of course she found out. She stood in our rented corner, the whiteboard behind her, and asked me why I had cut her out of a decision that was half hers. And I didn't have an answer that wasn't my father's answer. So I gave her silence instead. And silence, I had learned in that kitchen, is the cruelest thing you can hand a person who is waiting for you to turn around. She gathered her things. She didn't shout. She said that she had left one place that treated her like she didn't count, and she was not going to build another one. Then she walked out, and I stood alone in the corner that was supposed to be ours, holding the whole thing by myself, exactly the way I had always thought I wanted it. 2 nights later, at 2 a.m, alone in the rented corner, I got 2 pieces of paper. The first was an email I printed, because some things you just need to hold. A grant award notice. The foundation money. Funded at last. The harder road, paying off enough to breathe for a year. The second came in the same dead hour. A notice that the core patent, the molecule at the center of everything, the thing I had carried in a notebook out of my father's house, had been granted in my name. I laid them both on the kitchen table of my empty apartment. I sat down and I looked at them. The grant letter and the patent notice. And for the first time in my whole life, no one had signed off on me but me. There was no father to approve it, no committee to bless it, no senior name lending me its light. Just my own work, judged on its own terms, and found worth funding. I had done exactly what I set out to do. I had built proof of my own value with my bare hands, on the hardest road there is alone. And I sat there in the 2 a.m. quiet, with the 2 papers glowing under the kitchen light, waiting to feel the thing I had been chasing for years. The vindication. The finally. The see, I did matter. It did not come. What came instead was Nadia's empty side of the whiteboard, 4 blocks away in a rented corner, and the echo of my own front door as she had walked out of it, and the slow, terrible understanding that I had won the exact victory my father had. And it was just as hollow. I had gotten everything I wanted and driven out the one person who wanted to share it, and my 2 glowing papers could not fill a chair. I want to tell you, I ran to her that night. I didn't. I sat with that hollow victory for a long time, because I am stubborn in the exact way that has cost me the most. And I told myself the papers were enough, that I didn't need a partner, that I had proven I could do it alone, and doing it alone was the point. I framed the grant letter. I actually framed it, hung it on the wall of my empty apartment where no one but me would ever see it. And then I stood back and looked at a beautiful thing in an empty room. And I finally understood what I was looking at. I was looking at my father's house, not the building, the arrangement. A man alone with his certainty, having decided who counted and who did not, sitting in rooms he had emptied of everyone who might have loved him, calling the emptiness safety. I had spent 3 years running from him, and I had built a smaller copy of his house and moved into it. The victory on my wall was real. The molecule was real. The grant was real. But a value you can only prove in an empty room is not a value. It is a sentence. And I had sentenced myself to the same solitude he lived in and called it winning. I took the frame down, and I understood that the papers had asked me a question I had been dodging for 3 years, which was whether I had left my father's way of measuring worth, or whether I had just carried it out the door with me in a notebook. I almost called home that night. I need to be honest about that, too. In the lowest hour, staring at the empty side of the whiteboard, my thumb found its way to the old number, the blocked one, my mother's. And it hovered there, because that is the trick the wound plays on you. When you are most alone, it tells you that the people who made you alone are the only cure for it. I sat with my thumb over that blocked number for a long time, and I let myself imagine it. The call connecting, my mother's voice, the impossible sentence I had wanted for 3 years, we were wrong. Come home. And then I remembered her shoulders at the sink. I remembered that she had grieved me before I ever saw the transfer. That she had already made her choice in silence, and that no call I made could unmake it. The cure the wound offered was a door that had never actually been open. I took my thumb off the number. I didn't call. Instead, I sat down and did the harder, smaller, realer thing. I wrote Nadia a message. And it was not a speech, because I don't give speeches. I told her she was right, that I had built a wall out of something that was done to me, and that I had made her pay for it, and that I did not want to run a place that treated people the way I had been treated. I told her the grant had come through. I told her the chair was still hers if she wanted it. Then I put the phone down, and for the first time in 3 years, I waited on someone else's answer without it feeling like being a beneficiary. It felt like hope. I was learning the difference. Nadia came back, but she made me earn it, which was exactly right. She didn't forgive me in a single conversation. She came back to the bench first, cautious, professional, watching to see whether the message had been words or change. And I did the work of showing her it was change, slowly, one decision at a time, by bringing her into the things I would once have carried alone, by leaving the notebook where she could reach it and meaning it, by learning the specific muscle of letting another person hold something I loved without assuming they would move it out of my name. It was the hardest engineering I ever did, harder than the molecule, because there was no instrument for it. We made the company real that year. We incorporated it. We gave it a name that had nothing to do with Rowan, nothing to do with the family I had left, a name that was only ours. And I signed the papers as a founder and made sure Nadia's name sat right beside mine. An owner, not a beneficiary, because I had finally learned the difference between the two words and what it costs a person to be only ever the second one. We hired our first 2 people. We were 4 humans and a molecule and a rented corner that had become 2 rented rooms. It was nothing. It was everything. And somewhere out in the world, in a small industry newsletter that no one I knew would ever read, a paragraph appeared about a promising young company and the grant it had won, with my name in it, spelled right. I didn't think anything of it. It was a seed I didn't know I was planting. The company grew the way real things grow, unevenly, painfully, faster than we could handle, and slower than we needed. The molecule worked. That was the miracle underneath everything, that the thing I had carried out of my father's house in a notebook actually did what I said it would. And once it worked, the world's attention turned toward us in that sudden way it has. All at once, after years of nothing. We took on more contracts. We hired more people. Nadia ran the engineering and I ran the science. And together we ran a thing that had somehow become bigger than the 2 of us. If you have ever built something at 2 a.m. with no one watching, you know the strange grief of the moment it stops being yours alone and becomes real enough that other people depend on it. Tell me in the comments, did you ever build something they never got to take credit for? Some quiet proof that only you saw. There were payrolls to make now, people whose rent depended on my decisions, and the pressure of that was different from the pressure of surviving. Heavier, because it was not only my own future in my hands anymore. To grow past a certain point, we needed real money. The kind of money that does not come from grants and small contracts. We needed investors. And investors would ask me to do the one thing I had spent my whole life refusing. They would ask me to give up control. The word for what we needed was a funding round. And everyone told me it was the natural next step, the thing successful companies do. And everyone was right. And I dreaded it with my whole body. Because a funding round is a room full of strangers deciding what you are worth. It is being appraised. It is standing in front of people with more power than you and watching them put a number on the thing you built. And if that does not sound like a nightmare to you, then no one ever moved your future out of your name while you slept. Nadia understood. She always understood the shape of my fear better than I did, because she had her own version of it. We prepared for months. We built the pitch, the numbers, the story of the company. And the whole time a voice in me kept whispering that I was walking back into the exact situation I had fled, handing my worth to people who could decide in a single meeting that I didn't count. I told myself this time was different. Because this time, I would keep control, hold the majority, never be a beneficiary again. I built the entire round around that one non-negotiable. I would raise the money and give up nothing that mattered. I would let strangers invest and let no one in. It was, I can see now, the same wall in a new place, the same mistake wearing a suit. And the round I built to protect me was about to become the thing that nearly destroyed the company. Because a wall keeps out the people who would save you, along with the ones who would take from you. I controlled everything about that pitch. Every slide, every number, every word out of both our mouths. All of it ran through me first, because I did not trust the process, and I did not trust the room. And underneath both, I did not trust that anyone would fight for the company if I was not personally holding it up with my own two hands. Nadia warned me. She sat me down before the first meeting and told me gently that investors do not fund a molecule. They fund a team, and that a founder who cannot let go of a single slide is a founder who is going to read as a risk. I heard her. I did not listen. There is a difference, and the difference cost me. I walked into those rooms as a woman who had built something extraordinary entirely on her own strength, and I presented it exactly that way, as a thing I had done alone and would keep doing alone. And I could not see that the very quality I was proudest of, my aloneness, my refusal to depend on anyone, was landing on those investors as a flashing warning light. I thought I was showing them strength. I was showing them the wound. And in one of those rooms, near the end of the round, a lead investor who had all but committed, whose money would have anchored the whole raise, watched me insist on control one time too many. And I saw something shift behind his eyes, a small door closing, and I told myself it was nothing. For a few weeks, it looked like I had won. The round was coming together. Term sheets were circulating. The lead investor's commitment, the big one, seemed close enough to touch. And the smaller investors were lining up behind him the way they do, waiting for the anchor to drop so they could follow. Nadia and I let ourselves breathe a little. We started planning the hires we would make, the equipment we would finally buy, the second stage of the science we had been too broke to attempt. I even, for one dangerous evening, let myself feel safe, that most expensive of feelings. And safety made me careless in the specific way it always makes me careless, which is that it let me believe I could keep doing things alone and get away with it. I remember Nadia looking at me across our 2 rooms one night, both of us tired and hopeful, and saying that she thought we had made it, that the hard part was behind us. I agreed with her. We were both wrong, because the anchor had not dropped. It was still hanging in the air, held up by one man's private assessment of one founder. And that assessment had been forming in the back of a room for weeks, in the space between what I thought I was showing and what I was actually showing. And it was about to come down on us with the full weight of everything I had refused to learn. The lead investor pulled out on a Thursday, at the last possible moment, in a phone call that lasted under 2 minutes and ended the round. He was polite about it. They are always polite about it. He said the science was strong and the market was real and the team was talented. And then he said the words that took the floor out from under me the second time in my life: founder risk. He said the company was too dependent on a single person who did not appear able to share control, and that a founder standing that alone was a founder who could be a point of failure, and therefore he was passing. He called it founder risk, but I heard exactly what he meant. And what he meant was that a woman standing alone is a woman who can be pushed. When the anchor left, the others left too, the way they always do, the smaller commitments evaporating in a single afternoon once there was no one to follow. By Friday, the round was dead. By Friday, the company that 4 people depended on had no money coming and no runway left. And a founder sitting alone in 2 rented rooms, holding all of it, exactly the way she had always insisted on holding everything, and discovering that alone is not a fortress. Alone is just alone. That night was the worst night, and I am not going to dress it up. I sat in the dark of the 2 rooms that could not make payroll, and I felt the full weight of what I had done. And there was no father to blame for it, no transfer confirmation with someone else's name, no silent mother at a sink. There was only me, and the truth I had been running from since I walked out of that kitchen. My father had told me I was not worth fighting for, and I had spent 8 years trying to prove him wrong by fighting for myself so hard and so alone that I had recreated, in every relationship I had, the exact isolation he had sentenced me to. I had thought my solitude was strength. The investor had seen it for what it was. It was the wound, walking around in a founder's clothes. And it had finally cost me not just my own peace, but the livelihoods of people who had trusted me. I sat with that until it stopped being an accusation and started being a fact. Cold and clear, the way the kitchen had gone cold and clear 8 years before. And in that clarity, I finally understood the thing I had been refusing since Nadia first laid her page beside my notebook. My value had never depended on my doing it alone. That was my father's math, not mine. He measured worth by who could stand without anyone. But a person who cannot let anyone in has not proven her strength. She has only proven that she is still living in the kitchen, still waiting for someone to turn around, still certain that the moment she needs anyone, they will move her out of her name. I did not want to live in the kitchen anymore. The next morning, I did the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than leaving home, because leaving home was a wall going up, and this was a wall coming down. I went to Nadia and I gave her the company, not out of charity, out of truth. I made her a full co-founder, equal, not in title but in fact, in the ownership and the control and the deciding. And I opened every decision, every number, every closed room I had been guarding, and I put them on the table between us, where she could reach them. I told the whole team the truth about the round, that it had died because of me, because I could not share, and that I was done running the company like a fortress with one guard. I brought them in, all of them, into the decisions that would save us or sink us. It felt like standing at the edge of that kitchen again, waiting to see if anyone would turn around. Except this time, I was the one turning around, choosing to trust before I had proof it was safe, which is the only kind of trust that counts. And they did not move me out of my name. They stayed. They fought. Nadia rebuilt the pitch around a team instead of a founder, around a company that could survive any single one of us leaving, which is exactly what a healthy thing is and exactly what my father's house never was. We went back out into the world of money, not as a woman standing alone, but as a company standing together. And the difference was everything. A different investor came in, and she came in precisely because of the thing that had scared the first one away. She looked at a company that had nearly died and rebuilt itself around shared control, at a founder who had learned to let go, at a team that had chosen to stay through the worst of it, and she saw not risk, but resilience. She said in the meeting that she invested in teams that could survive their founders, and that ours finally could. The round closed in weeks. The money came in. The company that had been 4 people in 2 rented rooms became 20 people in a real building. Then 40. Then more. And the molecule I had carried out of my father's house in a notebook went from a promising idea to a thing that actually helped people, which had been the whole point underneath all the other points. The entire time I had built it, but I had not built it alone. And the not alone was not a compromise. It was the cure. It was the thing that separated what I made from what my father made. A house full of people who chose to stay from a house emptied of everyone who might have loved him. I did not celebrate that round either. Not the way people expect. I sat in the new building after everyone had gone home in the quiet, and I felt something I had not felt since before the transfer. Not vindication. Peace. And peace, I was beginning to understand, was the thing I had actually been building all along, underneath the molecule and the money. The one asset no one could ever move out of my name. The years after that moved fast, the way years do once a thing finds its footing. We raised again, larger. And again after that. And somewhere in there, the company crossed the line from a small, brave thing into a real one, valued by the people who value such things at a number with a lot of zeros that would have made my father's $95,000 look like pocket change. I want to be careful here, because the number is not the point. And the number was never mine anyway. Not really. Valuation is not money in your account. It is a story the market tells about what a company might be worth someday. And I understood that better than anyone, having spent my life learning the difference between what a thing is worth and what someone decides it is worth. The company was worth hundreds of millions on paper. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. I drove a car with 100,000 miles on it. I gave most of what came to me away quietly to the funds and grants and programs that catch people who have been left with nothing, because I knew exactly what it felt like to stand in a hallway and do the math on $600 in a dream. I did not build an empire to sit on top of it. I built it because building it was how I learned I had been worth building around all along. And out in the world I had left behind, in a house I had not seen in 8 years, my name was starting to appear in places my family could not help but eventually see. 8 years to the season after I walked out of that kitchen, I had become a woman I would not have recognized on the bus out of town. I ran a company that helped people. I had a partner I trusted with the thing I loved, and friends who had chosen me, and a life that was quiet in the good way. The way a lake is quiet, not empty but at rest. The wound was not gone. I did not want to lie to you and say the wound was gone. My father's sentence still surfaced sometimes in the dark water. You didn't matter enough to fight for. But it had lost its power to run me because I had finally learned to answer it. And my answer was the whole life I had built, standing all around me, full of people who had stayed. I had made peace with never getting the thing I had wanted at 2 a.m. 3 years before. The phone call, the apology, that we were wrong. I had let that go, and letting it go had been its own kind of freedom. The freedom of stopping, waiting for someone to turn around. I had a good, ordinary Tuesday morning in my company. Coffee going cold on my desk while I read a report. The building humming around me with the work of people I was proud of. And I was, for the first time in my adult life, at rest. I did not know that at 10 that morning, the past was going to walk through my front door. I did not know they had finally found me. I did not know they were coming to ask me for a favor. My assistant buzzed me a little before 10 and said there were people in the lobby asking for me. A family who said they were my family. And for a moment, the word did not compute because I had spent 8 years making sure that word had a different meaning. I asked her to describe them. She did, and each detail landed like a stone dropped into still water. An older man, certain of himself even in a lobby he did not belong in. A quiet woman standing slightly behind him. And a younger man, mid-20s, who looked, she said, like he might be sick. I sat at my desk with the cold coffee and the humming building and felt 8 years fold up like a map until the distance between that kitchen and this office was no distance at all. They had found me. Of course they had found me. My name had been in the world for years now, in the newsletters and the announcements and the profiles. And somewhere in that house, they had finally seen it, put it together, understood that the daughter they had priced as a cost had become something they could not have imagined. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect triumph here. What I felt was a cold, clear stillness. The same stillness from the kitchen, the lake going quiet before the cold. I had imagined this moment for 8 years, in 100 versions. Now, it was in my lobby, and I had to decide who I was going to be when I walked out there. The girl who left, or the woman she became. I walked out to the lobby, and there they were, smaller than 8 years had made them in my memory. My father, Gerald, still standing like a man who has decided he is right, but older now, the certainty worn thin at the edges. My mother, Marlene, behind him, her hands folded, her eyes finding my face and then flinching away, exactly as they had that last morning at the sink. And Dylan, my brother, was 27 now, and he did not look like the boy on the back steps anymore. He looked like a man who had been running from something for a long time and had just seen it catch up with him. When his eyes found the sign behind the reception desk, the company name, my title under it, founder, I watched him understand. I watched it move across his face in real time. The recognition that the sister he had let them discard, the one whose future he had spent without weighing it, was the person standing in front of him now. And his hands, I saw, began to tremble. He put them in his pockets to hide it. My father stepped forward and said my name warmly. The way you greet someone you have every right to greet, as if 8 years of silence were a small misunderstanding we could clear up over coffee. He said it was good to see me. He said I looked well. And I stood there in the lobby of the thing I had built out of what they took from me, and I understood in the first 3 sentences that they had not come to apologize. They had not come because they were sorry. There was no "we were wrong" in any of their faces. They had come because they needed something, and I was once again being measured for my usefulness. I brought them into a small meeting room because whatever this was, I was not going to have it in front of my staff. And because the meeting room was my ground, and I have learned to choose my ground, my assistant poured water and left, for glasses on a long table. 3 of them theirs, and none of us touched them. My father settled into his chair the way he settled into everything, as if it had always been his. And he began, and I let him, because I wanted to hear the whole shape of it before I said a word. He talked about family. He said family is family no matter what comes between them. That time heals. That a person's people are a person's people at the end of the day. He said they had followed my success with pride, which was a lie. So smooth he may have believed it, since they had not known I existed in the world until they needed me. He talked for a while, circling, warming the room up, and the whole time my mother looked at her folded hands, and Dylan stared at the untouched water, and his hands stayed in his pockets. I recognized the shape of what my father was doing, because it was the shape of a man building up to an ask, laying the family down like a foundation, so the request could stand on it. 8 years had not changed him at all. He was going to make me feel that I owed them, and then he was going to name the price. And he was doing it in the exact voice he had used to say, "Blood comes first." And I sat very still and let him arrive at the thing he had come to say. The thing he had come to say was that Dylan was ruined. He did not use that word. He said Dylan had hit a rough patch, that the business had run into trouble, that these things happen to anyone. But underneath the soft words, the story was hard and clear, and it was, I understood as it unfolded, the direct and inevitable end of the choice they had made 8 years before in my name. The $95,000 had gone into the franchise, the real start, the man from church. And Dylan, who had been given everything and taught to weigh nothing, had run it the way a person runs things when no one has ever let him feel the weight of a decision. And it had failed, and he had borrowed against the failure and borrowed again, until the debt was a number that could take his house. And when Dylan started to drown, my parents had done for him what they had never done for me. They had fought. They had put their own house up, mortgaged the home I grew up in to keep my brother from going under. And now the debt had swallowed that too, and they were all 3 of them standing at the edge of losing everything. The son they had invested in, and the parents who had bet the house on him. All of it, the long arithmetic of a single sentence spoken over a coffee cup 8 years before. Blood comes first. This was what Blood Comes First had built, and they had come to the daughter they had priced as a cost, because the cost had turned out to be the only one of them still standing. Then my father named the price, and it was a piece of paper. He slid it across the long table toward me, and I looked down at it, and the whole 8 years closed into a single point, because it was a personal guarantee. A document asking me to put my name and my company behind Dylan's debt, to become responsible for it, to sign my worth onto the line, the way they had once signed my worth off of one. He said it would be nothing to me with what you have now. He said, "This is nothing, just a signature." He said it the way he had said blood comes first, as a simple fact about how the world should work, that a person with means helps her family, that this was not even a real question. And I sat there looking at that piece of paper on the table, the mirror image of a transfer confirmation I had found 8 years before. One document that had moved my future out of my name, and now another document asking me to move it back in on someone else's behalf. And I understood that to my father, I had never stopped being a resource. I had only become a larger one. He had priced me as a cost when I was empty, and was pricing me as an asset now that I was full. And it was the same act of pricing. The same ruler, the same refusal to see me as anything but a number that could be moved where the family needed it. The paper sat between us. My mother watched her hands, and I did not reach for the pen. It was Dylan who broke the silence, and it was Dylan who almost undid me. He had not said a word since the lobby. Now he took his hands out of his pockets, and they were still shaking. And he looked at me, really looked, for the first time since he was 19 on the back steps. And he said the truest thing anyone in my family had ever said to me. He said, "I spent it all, Paula, every cent. And I do not even know how. His voice cracked on it, and I saw in my brother's shaking hands and his broken voice the other half of what had been done to us both. Because the same choice that had emptied me had hollowed him from the inside in a way I had escaped, precisely because they took everything from me. I had been forced to learn my own weight. Dylan had been protected from ever feeling any weight at all, handed everything, taught to weigh nothing. And it had left him a man who could lose a fortune and genuinely not understand where it went. I had been the cost, he had been the asset, and the asset had been destroyed by the same hand that discarded the cost. Because a child you never let fail is a child you never let grow. I looked at my brother, and for the first time in 8 years I did not hate him. I pitied him, and worse, I understood him. And understanding him made what I had to do next both easier and infinitely harder. Here is the thing no one tells you about the moment you have been waiting 8 years for. It comes with a temptation dressed as a gift. Because sitting in that room, I saw the easy road. And it was so easy, and it glittered. I could sign the paper. I could pay the debt outright. It truly would be nothing to the company now. I could make the whole ruin disappear with a signature and a wire. The same instrument that had once erased me. And if I did, I might finally get the thing I had wanted at 2 a.m. 3 years before. The thing I had told myself I had let go of. My father, watching his family saved by the daughter he discarded, might finally have to say it. We were wrong about you. Gratitude might do what justice never had. I could buy, with one signature, the apology I had wanted my whole life. And I felt the old wound rise up and reach for that pen, because the wound had never wanted revenge. The wound had only ever wanted to matter. And here was a way to matter to them at last. To become so useful, so necessary, so undeniably the family savior that they would have to admit my worth. I sat with my hand near the pen and understood exactly what I was being offered. Not a chance to help my brother. A chance to finally earn, at the price of one signature, the love they had refused to give me for free. And I understood, all the way down, that taking it would mean they were still the ones deciding what I was worth. My father saw me hesitate near the pen, and he did the thing that saved me, though he meant to do the opposite. When I did not immediately reach for it, when the silence went a beat too long, the warmth dropped out of his voice. And the old voice came back, the barometer voice, certain and cold. He said, "Don't make this about you again. Family helps family." And there it was, 8 years later, the same sentence in a different key. Stop making this about you. It had been the ruler he measured me with in that kitchen, and it was the ruler he was measuring me with now. And hearing it again in that room, over that piece of paper, I finally heard it all the way through. Because he was right that it was not about me, and he was wrong about what that meant. To him, not about me meant I should disappear into my usefulness, sign the paper, save the family, and never once count my own cost. But there was another way for it to not be about me, and it was the opposite of his. It could not be about me, because my worth was no longer on the table at all. Not to be earned by signing, not to be proven by rescuing, not to be granted finally in gratitude. My worth had left that table 8 years ago, and built a whole life somewhere he could not reach. And nothing I did in this room could add to it or take from it, because it had never been his to price. I heard his sentence for the last time, and it had no power left in it at all. I put down the pen I had not picked up, and I told my father the truth calmly, the way you state a fact about the tides. I said, "I'm not going to sign anything, Dad." His face began to change, and I kept going before he could load the old sentence again. I said, "But I'll do something better than rescue you. I'll show you the same door I had to walk through when you left me with nothing." Because I knew that door. I had spent 8 years learning, every inch of it. There are legitimate paths for a person drowning in debt. Real ones. Debt restructuring advisors and hardship programs. Honest channels that catch you and let you climb out on your own feet. The exact kind of unglamorous door I had walked through when I was a woman with $600 and no floor under her. I would not sign my worth onto Dylan's failure. But I would put my brother in front of the right people, connect him to a restructuring advisor who could actually save his house through proper means. And I would quietly pay that advisor's fee myself, anonymously, so that the help was real and the debt was his to climb out of. So that for the first time in his life, Dylan would feel the weight of a thing and carry it. And grow. My father stared at me. He said, "So that's it. You'd let your own brother lose his house to prove a point." And I looked at him, and I was not angry. And I said, no, I'd help him keep it, and finally stop letting you decide what I'm worth. And in the saying of it, I felt the last thread go slack. Because helping them this way meant I would never hear we were wrong. Gratitude would find the advisor, not me. I was letting go of the apology forever. And I found that I could. That was the price, and I paid it. And it bought me the one thing they could never take. In the quiet after I said it, I finally understood the thing I had been building for 8 years, and it was not the company. Standing in that room, watching my father fail to comprehend a daughter who would help without being owned, I saw the truth I had been blind to since the bus pulled out of town. I had told myself for 8 years that I was building all of this to make them see. That the company, the molecule, the number with all the zeros were an argument I was constructing to finally win the fight in the kitchen, to force my father to look at what I had done and admit what I was worth. But that was never what I had been doing. I had been building it for me. I had proven my worth to the only person whose verdict actually mattered. And I had done it years ago, at 2 a.m. with a grant letter and a patent. And again the night I let Nadia in. And again every ordinary day I ran a good company full of people who stayed. My father's recognition was not the missing piece. There was no missing piece. I had wanted him to sign off on me my whole life. And standing in that room, I understood that I had stopped needing his signature a long time ago and had just never noticed. The way you do not notice a headache has lifted until you reach for it, and it is gone. My worth was not a thing to be earned from him or anyone. It never had been. It was just true. And it had been true the whole time. Even in that kitchen. Even on that bus. Even at $600 in the dark. My father gathered himself and gathered his family and prepared to leave. And he did it without changing at all, which is the part people find hardest to accept. He did not have a revelation. He did not crumble. As he stood, he said almost to himself that of course I would help, because I was family, because blood comes first. Folding even my refusal to be owned back into his own story, so that it confirmed rather than challenged him. The force I had spent my life inside did not break in that room. It walked out of it intact, still certain, still measuring. And it would go on measuring some other soul somewhere, because forces like that are not defeated in a single meeting by a single woman. But I had done the only thing that was ever actually possible, which was not to destroy the force, but to break its grip on me. It could no longer price me. It could no longer move me out of my name. My mother was the last to rise, and for one moment she paused at the door, and her mouth opened, and I saw something struggle up toward the surface of her. 8 years of a silence she had chosen, and I thought for one breath that she was going to say it. She looked at me, and then, the way she always had, she closed her mouth and folded her hands and followed my father out. And I watched the weakest link in the chain choose the chain one final time. And I let her, because her apology, too, had stopped being something I needed. The restructuring advisor called Dylan within the week, and my brother, to his credit, answered the phone. I know, because I asked the advisor to keep me informed of nothing but whether he showed up. And he showed up. He began the slow, unglamorous work of climbing out of a hole through the proper door, meeting by meeting, payment by payment. The first thing in his life he had ever had to carry himself. It would take him years. It would not be a miracle, because I had not bought him a miracle. I had bought him a chance, which is a more expensive and more valuable thing. My parents kept their house through legitimate means, the restructuring reaching back far enough to catch them too. And they kept it not because their daughter signed a paper, but because their daughter knew which doors existed and made sure they found them. I watched all of it from a distance, the way you watch weather move across a valley you no longer live in. I did not call. I did not visit. I did not insert myself into the climbing, because the climbing was theirs. And the moment I made it mine again, I would have handed my father back his ruler. I had helped. I had helped as much as help could be given without becoming ownership. And then I did the hardest and most necessary thing, which was to close the door again, gently, and keep it closed. People ask me, when they hear pieces of this, whether it was hard to walk away a second time. Whether some part of me wanted to stay in it now that I had the power, now that I was finally the one holding the family up. And the honest answer is no. And the reason is the whole point of everything I learned. I had already given what could be given. I had put my brother in front of the door and paid for his passage through it. To do more, to reopen my life to them, to let them back into the peace I had built, would not have been generosity. It would have been the wound offering me one more chance to matter to people who had never learned to see me. I did not need to matter to them anymore. That was the freedom the whole 8 years had bought. So I set the boundary, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of the simplest clarity I have ever felt. I had done enough. The door was closed. And a closed door, I finally understood, is not the same as a wall. A wall is what I built out of fear to keep everyone out. A door I chose to close is something else entirely. It is a woman deciding freely who gets to live in her peace, and knowing without guilt that peace is hers to protect. Nadia found me in my office that evening after they had gone, and she did the thing she always does, which is to see me clearly and say the small, true thing instead of the big, false one. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was, and I meant it, which surprised us both a little. She sat down across from me in the quiet building and did not fill the silence with advice. And I was grateful because she, of all people, understood what it had cost me to help them without being owned by them. After a while, I said, with the dry flicker of humor that has kept me alive through all of it, that family reunions are overrated. And she laughed, and the laugh was the realest thing that had happened all day. Because sitting across from me was my family, the one I had chosen. The partner who had made me earn her trust back and had been right too. And outside in the world was the family I had been born into, whom I had just helped and would not see again. And I knew with total certainty which of the two I would trade my whole company to keep. They taught me I wasn't worth fighting for. And it took me 8 years to learn they were only half right. I wasn't worth fighting for to them. But to me, it turned out I was worth building a whole life around. Worth every 2 a.m., and every rejection, and every wall I finally learned to take back down. And peace, I have found, is the one thing no one can transfer out of your name, no matter who owns the account. My father priced me as a cost. He was wrong about the number and wronger about the ruler. Because the truth is that a person's worth was never a thing to be signed onto her or off of her by anyone at all. It was hers the whole time. It was mine in that kitchen. It was mine on that bus. It is mine now in the quiet, and it always will be. I drove home that night to my 2-bedroom apartment, and I set my keys in the bowl by the door, and I turned off my phone. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in my rooms was not the silence of a kitchen where no one turns around. It was the silence of a life I had built and got to keep. If walking away ever felt like losing to you, I want you to hear this from a woman who did it and never regretted it. Sometimes walking away is not the end of your worth. It is the beginning of it. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between your family's expectations and your own true worth? Tell me your story in the comments. I really want to know.